Return.
Don't you remember you told me you loved me, baby? Rainy days, Mondays always get me down.
Close to you, remembering the Carpenters.
Saturday at 8:30 on WTTW. WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center.
The great thing is to last and get your work done and see and hear and learn and understand and write when there is something that you know and not before and not too damned much after.
Watch one of the best-selling recording artists of all time for her unforgettable concert, filmed at London's Wembley Stadium. Watch Tina Turner one last time.
Sunday at 8 on WTTW.
Hi, Chicago. I'm Destiny, and you're watching WTTW.
Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment. But first, some of today's top stories. The United Center will soon be buzzing with activity, but not for any Bulls or Hawks games. Federal and state officials will open a mass vaccination site at the center in the parking lot starting March 10th. They say they hope to be able to provide 6,000 shots per day, and some of that supply could eventually include the single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The site will prioritize residents older than 65 and those who live in the hardest-hit communities. And today, state and federal officials came together to announce the new effort. Governor J.B. Pritzker says he sees it as a sign that the end of the pandemic is near.
Things are getting better. Someday, not too far from now, we'll be at the United Center, not for a life-saving shot, but for a game-winning shot.
And Illinois public health officials report more than 2,400 new COVID cases in the last 24 hours, with 55 additional deaths. That makes for a statewide total of 1.18 million cases and 20,460 deaths. The preliminary 7-day test positivity rate right now stands at 2.7%. City Council takes another crack at voting on how more than $300 million in federal COVID relief can be spent. Some aldermen, including progressives and federally indicted 14th Ward Alderman Ed Burke, took issue with Mayor Lori Lightfoot's decision to spend $281 million in relief aid on police personnel costs. Burke and Alderman Ray Lopez, also a Lightfoot critic, used a parliamentary maneuver to block a vote on Wednesday, that is, which led to today's special city council meeting. Now, the measure passed by a 37-10 vote, with Burke and Lopez joining 8 others to vote no. Outspoken St. Sabina pastor Father Michael Madigan is cleared of wrongdoing by the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. DCFS issued a report today saying that an allegation of suspected child abuse or neglect was, quote, unfounded after the agency conducted an investigation. Well, the report goes on to say that its conclusion does not necessarily mean the incident didn't occur. Madigan is facing an investigation from the Catholic Archdiocese of Chicago related to a 40-year-old sexual abuse allegation. Madigan has maintained that he is innocent of that charge. And now joining us are Marianne Ahern of NBC5 News, Will Jones of ABC7 News, Rachel Hinton of the Chicago Sun-Times, and Susie An of WBEZ. And first this week, former House Speaker Michael Madigan had little to say after his hand-picked successor resigned following allegations of questionable conduct. And then a new successor, Angelica Guerrero-Cuellar, was installed. Take a look.
Is what happened to Mr. Kodat another manifestation of the cancel culture? I mean, do you have concerns about that?
What culture?
Cancel culture.
Really?
All right. Culture.
A new kind of culture that the speaker is learning about. Marianne Ahern, do we know anything about what this questionable conduct by Edward Guerra-Kodat, the man who replaced Madigan for 3 days, was?
I did speak to a couple of folks who had posted online that knew him from high school, knew who he was. I think some of it you'd have to classify right now as hearsay. Here's what the problem was. Edward Kodat's name did not surface until Sunday morning as the meeting took place. And as we've seen in big appointments, big and small, usually the names do come out ahead of time. And that's when you would, that's one way of vetting. You'd get some public vetting going on. And then perhaps the speaker and his team would have learned a little bit more about him. I do think it was obviously some kind of personal conduct, and the way that they wrote their release, we have zero tolerance. It gave the hint, and this is a hint, but also I've spoken to several state representatives who've heard the same thing. It might have been a Me Too kind of allegation. But I hesitate to really go further because I didn't get absolutely that confirmation. Of course, didn't get it from the Speaker's office.
And Madigan's organization has been rocked by Me Too allegations over the last 3 years. Will Jones, Madigan throughout his career has been famously circumspect, buttoned up, doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Are you surprised that this young man wasn't vetted and he fumbled this?
It's very surprising. Madigan says he wants to focus on the road forward and not look back, but so many questions about how this got passed. Did they vet him properly? What were the questions? He was only in this position for about 3 days. That's unheard of.
And apparently he's not going to be getting that monthly salary that he was entitled to, even though he was only in office for a couple of days. Rachel Hinton, the runner-up now becomes the successor. Her name is Angelica Guerrero-Cuellar. What do we know about her?
She's currently the manager of Envision Community Services, a role that she said that she plans to exit so that she can focus full-time on being a state representative. In 2017 and 2018, she was also a field director for Angie Sandoval's campaign for Cook County Board. Angie Sandoval is the daughter of former and late Senator Martin Sandoval, who was ensnared in a public corruption scheme and who, ended up helping the feds before dying last December of COVID. She seems to be very involved in the community. She's a volunteer at several community organizations, mostly focused on Latino things, Latino issues, I should say, or Latinx issues. But she seems to be very ready to represent the community in the House.
And as you mentioned, ties to the Sandoval family there. And concurrently, Susie An, while this is going on, there's a family fight to replace Madigan's other role, that of head of the Democratic Party of Illinois. There are 3 women of color vying for this position. What's behind the tension behind the scenes here?
Well, we know that discussions have been around wanting a woman of color to fill this role. The tension comes from who Durbin supports or who Pritzker supports. Right now, it looks like it's really between Representative Robin Kelly and Alderman Michelle Harris. So we'll see who comes up on top, but we're seeing a split on the top political players and who they're throwing their support behind.
And Marianne, I spoke to a few folks close to Durbin and Pritzker this week. I'm sure you did too. They were mad at each other for having this internecine battle. What's going on behind the scenes?
Yes, they're peeved at each other. Although today Durbin tried to put his best foot forward and said, hey, if it was really this big family feud, I wouldn't be attending this event together that he had joined with Pritzker. But there are lots of phone calls. And if you hear from the folks who are supporting Robin Kelly, what you're hearing is, oh my goodness, the Pritzker people just won't leave us alone. And they're calling and trying to get people persuaded to the Michelle Harris side. Hey, whoever is the leader of the Democratic Party of Illinois, it's an important position. So you can see why they, whether it's Durbin or Pritzker, and then we don't forget Christina Cruz, who is the state senator that Chuy Garcia, Representative Garcia, supports.
I mean, Christina Castro.
Castro. The Latino caucus wants to play a role. They're demanding a meeting. They're demanding a public meeting. I really don't think that's going to happen. I think it might get settled behind the scenes. But nevertheless, it's an interesting fight.
Well, Rachel Hinton, between these three candidates, are there different visions for leading the party? I mean, you have a lot of things going on. You have the 2022 midterms. You have the remap that's going to happen sometime in the next few months. Do each of these candidates differ on those things?
I would say largely no. I mean, given that they're all running to be the lead Democrat, the leader of the Democratic Party of the state, they all want to continue ensuring the Democratic majorities in the House, the Senate, make sure that, in 2022 they maintain or they keep the seats that they already have. In terms of governor, the 2 Senate seats, Tammy Duckworth is up, so she will be facing re-election. I think really right now we're seeing all three of these people say they're the best person to ensure these Democratic majorities remain. But largely right now, I don't believe that there's a real split in their vision for the party.
And as we mentioned, it's Senator Durbin backing one candidate. He's a power center in the party. Governor Pritzker backing another. He's a power center. And Will Jones, I mean, he does hold the highest office in the state as a Democrat, and is basically the guy funding the party out of his own pocket. Does that stand to reason that he would get his preferred candidate as the head of the party?
And Pritzker is also coming up for re-election, so that should weigh into the decision. But just take a look at Madigan has been in that position since 1998, so this has been a long time coming for new leadership. And as I believe Rachel mentioned, a lot of people are excited about a woman of color leading the party here in Illinois.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity that doesn't come around much in Illinois, as you mentioned. Let's talk about, you mentioned he's running for governor. There's a couple folks on the Republican side that have declared already. Rachel Hinton, one of them is the state senator Darren Bailey from downstate, who's given the governor a lot of grief over some of the shutdown orders. Tell us about Bailey.
Yeah, Bailey has largely deferred with Governor Pritzker on how to handle the coronavirus. He has, angered some of his colleagues in the House by refusing or not wearing a mask. Last month, when the House was in session, he had a medical emergency. He, I believe, passed out on the floor of the Bank of Springfield Center. Other than that, he's a staunch Republican, and within Xenia, Illinois, he really has support. So it's unclear right now, obviously, if he will be able to give Pritzker a run for his money, even if, he will become the Republican nominee for governor. But right now, I believe that, we have a very staunch Republican, not a rhino by any means, a Republican in name only.
And moving over to the national level, Susie, on Congresswoman Marie Newman from the southwest side of Chicago, she got into a spat a few days ago with the conspiratorial Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene over transgender rights. What went on behind the scenes here?
Well, Ms. Newman put up a transgender flag in support of her daughter outside of her office, and then across the hall, Marjorie Taylor Greene put up a sign that said, there are only 2 genders, and I forget the quote underneath, but something like "trust the science." So it was definitely an attack on what Newman did by putting out the flag, and it's caused a lot of tension between these 2 neighbors, and of course fired off a lot of debate across the nation. And
this Congresswoman Taylor Greene just continues to get herself in the news over these controversies. And I guess the backdrop here is the House had passed an anti-discrimination bill, an LGBTQ anti-discrimination bill, Mary Ann Ahern, has Congresswoman Green apologized or said in any way that taunting Congresswoman Newman's transgender child was wrong?
Certainly not that I've heard of. If she has, I missed it, but I think I would have heard about that today. No, and it is quite interesting that they are right across the hall from each other in this spirit of maybe trying a little bit of bipartisanship. It certainly is not going to happen between those two.
Certainly,
and this Congresswoman from Georgia has a lot of problems with her neighbors. A few weeks ago, she got into a spat with, I believe, a Congresswoman from the St. Louis area over the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think she just loves controversy. So this is what she looks out for.
Right. And this is echoing kind of what Illinois Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger said about her. She's trying to make herself famous through some of these personal attacks. Let's move over to City Council. Mayor Lori Lightfoot was caught on a hot mic cursing Alderman Burke and Lopez, but it was heard after Alderwoman Rossana Rodriguez Sanchez spoke about a resolution honoring Black History Month. Take a look at the video.
That have contributed to make this city a better place for all. Thank you, Madam.
You're kidding me. Thank you, Alderwoman. The chair recognizes Alderman Jim Gardner.
So in case you couldn't understand, she says you have to be effing kidding me. Will Jones, is there blowback for the mayor, making this remark? And it's clear it doesn't seem like she was responding to what the Alderwoman was saying there. Or is this something that we expect from the mayor?
We've known her to use choice words, but I think this is a very relatable moment for a lot of us because we're all dealing with this virtual way of working. So a lot of us have forgotten to push mute and regret that something came over the air during a meeting that we did not intend to. So I think this won't have any blowback for her at all. I think it actually makes her a little more relatable.
And what it seems like what she said she was referring to was what Alderman Burke and Lopez did on Wednesday, deferring and publishing, aka delaying a vote on how to spend some of this COVID relief money. Mary Ann Ahern, it ended up passing today. Why was Burke especially so outspoken against this?
Isn't that interesting? Because here, especially when she wants to spend a lot of this $377 million that was approved today on police overtime expenses, and although he claims that she's sort of fudging the numbers, that the city says this was for security at testing sites and security at McCormick Place, and so it is tied to the COVID relief. And Alderman Burke, who, of course, Mayor Lori Lightfoot could really count her victory at City Hall and trace it back to when all of this first developed, and we all learned about Alderman Ed Burke's troubles with the federal government, that there perhaps this is his payback, but it is kind of interesting. He was quiet for last year and a half or so, but in the last 3 days, he's been way more outspoken.
Seems to have found his legs there, and Alderman Burke is usually a reliable vote in favor of the police department. Here he is voting against spending money on police personnel costs. Will Jones, also at City Council this week, a few aldermen introduced a resolution calling for universal basic income, or at least a pilot in the city. You did a story today on that same program starting up in Gary, Indiana. How would that work?
It's a new pilot program called Guaranteed Income Validation Effort, GIVE for short, and they just recently launched the program. They're going to be sending out surveys to find 125 residents to take part in this program, so not very widespread at this point. So these residents will receive $500 a month, no strings attached, for a year, so they can do what they want with the money. And as you know, Gary is a city that has been struggling for decades, and the goal is to provide a little help for people struggling. But I spoke with some residents, and they were saying that $500, that really won't do much a month. But the organizer of this program says that is just a start. They only have so much money. And it's important to stress that this will not include any tax dollars. They were given $500,000 for mayors for a guaranteed income, and they're hoping to raise $1.6 million from private donors and grants. So that is a big task ahead, but they say this should be part of the national discussion about helping people who are struggling in this economy, especially through this pandemic.
So it seems like the size and scope of these kinds of programs will depend on how much foundational or private money they can get, at least for the time being, for trial runs. Rachel Hinton, I want to move over to more action in the U.S. Attorney's Office. More federal indictments this week, that of former state lawmaker Eddie Acevedo and his 2 sons who are lobbyists. And then there's also an indictment of a man who infamously, allegedly helped Danny Solis find those blue pills all those years ago. What is behind these cases?
Well, both are related to taxes, tax fraud, I believe, for the Acevedos, as well as for Mr. Caldero. I believe his first name is Roberto Caldero. Really, I think what we should focus on is the fact that, like, the same grand jury number that appeared in these indictments has also appeared in terms of, or in relation to a federal subpoena that went out to former Speaker Michael Madigan's office, as well as the same on the racketeering charges for Alderman Ed Burke. So this appears to be the drumbeat of these federal investigations is growing. It's getting louder. More people who are closely connected, or who were closely connected to both Burke and to former Rep. Mike Madigan, they're falling. They're getting indicted. What that means for them, I'm not sure.
And Marianne Aaron, is there any coincidence to the fact that Madigan has abruptly left his final positions of power this week, and then these indictments came down?
Well, there certainly is that question of timing, and also with that timing of John Lausch, the U.S. attorney, who many thought today would have been his last day, as all the other U.S. attorneys across the country, except for perhaps 2, as is customary by the new administration, to clean house and have their own appointees. We've learned that Lausch will get to stay at least until his successor is named. Might they slow walk who that successor is, as we wait to see what other shoes might drop. Well, you know, it could take a month. It could take 6 months. I mean, I do think it depends on, there'll be some interviews, and then Senators Durbin and Duckworth will present their list. Clearly, they've got a list ready to go. I mean, this isn't a surprise to them. And even Mayor Lightfoot this week talked about, hey, I do want Lausch to stay, but when he does go, there has never been a woman of color in that position.
And
so
she, of course, was considered
her lobby.
She was considered for that reportedly years and years ago. Let's move on to some of the COVID news. National and local leaders announced the March opening of the United Center as a mass vaccination site, which they hope will help address the disparities that have dogged the rollout. Take a look.
We're viewing our vaccine programs, like this pilot program, through an equity lens in order to restore the communities that have been hardest hit and to allow residents to return to normal life as soon as possible.
Susie An, Dr. Arwady this week talked about improving numbers for vaccinations in some of the hardest hit communities, especially the Black and Latinx communities. Is the city making progress on closing the equity gap here?
The city's making some progress by opening up sites in underserved neighborhoods, but it's going to take some time, especially with such low supply and getting things out there. I mean, we've all seen those the heat maps of where most of the vaccinations are going, and a lot of neighborhoods that are predominantly white seem to be ahead of the other neighborhoods in getting vaccinations. So it's still going to take some time before we see a significant move to closing that gap.
And Will Jones, public officials keep saying they want to close that gap. They don't want there to be these disparities. But how do you put that into action?
Well, I hosted a town hall this week with Mayor Lightfoot and some other prominent Black doctors focused on the outreach to the Black community. And Mayor Lightfoot is well aware of this disparity, and she is concerned about it. And she also wanted to stress that once they get the supply, she wanted people to actually get the vaccine. She says there's a lot of concern in the Black community and Brown community as well about the safety of the vaccine. And a lot of Black Chicagoans are reluctant to get the vaccine based off of a historical mistreatment by the medical community. So she wants to stress that the vaccine is safe, but she is making progress in trying to get more people of color vaccinated. It's really important for the reopening of the city because Black and Brown folks make up 2/3 of the population.
And a lot of the zip codes that they live in have seen some of the highest COVID rates. Mary Ann Ahern at the United Center, they're saying they have the capacity to perhaps do 6,000 vaccinations a day. Will there be enough vaccine in Chicago to actually carry that out?
Well, because what's happening here, this is this pilot program from the federal government. They are shipping. This is 6,000 a day above what we are already receiving. This is not part of that count. So this is a lot more vaccine than we have been seeing in the past. I think the other big question is, how do you get the appointment? Because we have all been reporting those stories of how difficult it is. And this is not just a walk up to the United Center. You must come with an appointment.
And you have to go through that ZocDoc program, correct? The online program?
And I think we're going to hear more what other opportunities there might be. But yes, that's going to be one of them.
And there's a lot of folks, and providers know this, that perhaps, especially older populations that aren't as internet savvy. Susie, Rachel Hinton, how do you reach folks that can't just go online and refresh their page constantly?
I think that's the difficult part of this, that the city and the county, as well as the state, that they're trying to figure out. I believe all three have like door-to-door programs, trying to reach people where they are, trying to call them, text them, trying to get younger people to help the older people in their family get these vaccines. But that's definitely a hurdle in terms of vaccinating everybody and getting this vaccine out and making sure that people get it and getting to herd immunity.
Yeah, and we talked to some providers at UIC that said that they were texting people, they were calling people, they were trying to be proactive because they can't just rely on people going online and signing up. Susie Ahn, K through 5 students return to CPS classrooms next Monday. What kind of attendance do you expect from teachers and students?
We're expecting teachers who say that they're going to show up will show up. We're expecting less than 30% or 30% of students K through 5 opted to come back for a hybrid. And you might see classrooms where there are just a handful of kids. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, there's some classrooms that I've heard that are almost full, but others that maybe 1 kid. So we'll see how it plays out on Monday.
And very quickly, is that just parents that just still are afraid to send their kids back into in-person because of COVID?
I think it's a number of things. COVID definitely plays a part. Of course, the tension between the district and the union also played a part. I've heard parents felt pressured to not opt in to go back. But then there are also parents who, after listening to their school's plan of return, they didn't like it. So they maybe originally opted in for hybrid and they decided, no, I'm not going to do it.
Certainly everybody in the city feeling that tension between the union and CPS. Okay, we're out of time. So our thanks to Mary Ann Ahern, Will Jones, Rachel Hinton, and Susie Ahn. And that's our show for this Friday night. Don't forget you can get Chicago Tonight and the Weekend Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And be sure to join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. We'll look at how the pandemic has interrupted an income source for day laborers, and then join us at 6 p.m. Sunday for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Governor Pritzker signs a sweeping criminal justice bill, but what exactly is in it? And then we're back at 7 o'clock all next week. And now for the Weekend Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great weekend.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert